Friday nights in the city carry a certain heaviness, as though the pavement itself has absorbed everyone's exhaustion and is radiating it back. By the time I finally shut down my computer and left the office, the sky was already dimming, the kind of gray that makes the streetlights flicker on too early. My phone buzzed with reminders, unpaid bills, unanswered messages, all the clutter of a life that never slows down. I wanted to ignore it all. And then, at the edge of the curb, I saw Lena's car, headlights glowing like two waiting eyes, music thumping faintly through the doors. I pulled the handle and slid into the back seat, my bag tossed carelessly onto a pile of blankets, grocery bags, and half-pack jackets. Instantly, the air shifted. The windows were rolled down, letting in a warm gust of evening wind, carrying the smell of roasted corn from a vendor across the street, and the faint metallic tang of the city cooling after a long, hot day. Max sat at the wheel, drumming his fingers to the beat of a song that was too loud for comfort, but exactly right for escape. Hannah leaned forward from the passenger seat, her hair already wild from the wind, laughing at something I hadn't even heard yet. Lena turned with a grin, raising her brows as if to say, "Ready?" I wasn't. Not really. I was tired, frayed at the edges, half tempted to crawl back upstairs and bury myself under my sheets. But the moment the car eased into motion, tires humming against asphalt, the building slid by, shrinking into silhouettes, and behind the glass of the window, I caught my own reflection. Tired eyes, yes, but softening, brightening, in a way I hadn't seen for weeks. We weren't going far, just a small house by a lake that belonged to Lena's cousin, a weekend we had arranged half-jokingly months ago and nearly canceled more than once. Nothing dramatic, I had told myself when we agreed, just a short break. But as the skyline tilted farther behind us and the city lights melted into a blur of color, I realized how desperate I had been for even this small escape. The music grew louder, voices overlapping with lyrics, laughter spilling out as Hannah tried to record us singing and ended up choking on her own giggles. My hair whipped across my face in tangled waves, my lips sticky from the soda I had grabbed at the last second, and still I smiled. A wide, uncalculated smile. It wasn't about the destination. It was about leaving behind the version of myself that had been hunched over a desk all week, the one who measured life in deadlines and unanswered calls. Out here, even on the edge of the highway, with streetlights flashing past like comets, I felt lighter. Sometimes, freedom doesn't arrive with a bang. Sometimes it's just the hum of tires, the bass of a song vibrating in your bones, the laughter of friends who don't need you to be anything but present. And as I leaned back into the seat, letting the wind tangle my hair, I thought, this is what I've been missing. Not fireworks, not revelations, just space to breathe.
The road out of the city stretched ahead of us like a ribbon unspooling into the dark. At first, the traffic clung stubbornly, buses sighing at every stop, motorbikes weaving recklessly between lanes, horns blaring like the city's last attempt to hold us in its grip. But then, little by little, the skyline thinned. The tall glass towers gave way to low apartment blocks, then to clusters of houses, and finally to open fields that smelled faintly of earth and rain. With every mile, it felt as if another layer of weight was peeling away from my shoulders. Music filled the car, an endless rotation of songs from playlists we'd all contributed to. Lena was our self-appointed DJ, skipping tracks every 30 seconds until she landed on the ones that made us shout in unison. Max tapped the steering wheel in rhythm, his grin reflected in the windshield, while Hannah leaned out the window, hair snapping like a wild banner behind her. I sat back, the wind rushing over my face, and laughed when the camera lens of Lena's phone turned toward me. "Don't you dare post that," I shouted, half covering my face. She only smirked. "Memories, Selene. You'll thank me later." The sun had dipped low by then, smearing the horizon in pink and orange strokes that looked almost painted. Fields unrolled endlessly on both sides, gold stalks swaying in the last light, dotted with lonely trees that stood like watchmen over the land. From time to time, we passed farmhouses with lights glowing warmly in the windows, little pockets of life tucked into the quiet countryside. We talked about nothing and everything. Hannah confessed she once cried during a cooking show finale, which set off a round of teasing. Max bragged that he'd finally fixed the leak under his sink without flooding the apartment, a story he stretched into a saga so dramatic that it had us howling with laughter. Lena admitted she wrote an email to quit her job 3 times this month and never hit send. And me? I sat there soaking it in. These tiny revelations spoken in the safety of dark roads and loud music. At one point, the song changed to something soft, a melody woven with strings and piano. The energy in the car quieted, not out of boredom, but because the moment called for it. The conversation faded, replaced by the hum of the tires and the gentle chorus pouring from the speakers. Hannah rested her head on the window, eyes half closed, and Max loosened his grip on the wheel, his jaw unclenched. I watched their silhouettes against the fading sky and thought, this is the kind of peace you can't plan. It just happens when you allow it to. We stopped at a roadside stand for snacks, stumbling out of the car with stiff legs. The old woman behind the counter handed us bags of roasted nuts, their warmth seeping into our palms, their scent mixing with the cool evening air. We stood there eating with our fingers, giggling like children, brushing salt from our lips. It wasn't remarkable, not really, and yet in its ordinariness, it felt like a treasure I'd want to tuck away forever. By the time we climbed back into the car, the sky was dark enough for stars to begin showing, timid and faint at first, then bolder as the night thickened. The city was far behind us now, its noise just a memory, and ahead lay only open road and the promise of a weekend that didn't need to be spectacular to matter. I leaned back into my seat, pulling the blanket over my lap and closed my eyes for a moment. The car hummed, the laughter around me softened, and I thought, sometimes the best journeys aren't about where you're going, but about who you're with when you leave everything else behind.
By the time we reached the house, night had already settled in, thick and velvet across the sky. The road had wound tighter the farther we drove, curving past forests that whispered in the wind and fields silvered under the moon. When Max finally slowed and turned into a gravel driveway, the crunch beneath the tires sounded like a drum roll announcing our arrival. The house itself wasn't grand. A wooden cabin with wide steps, shutters painted a fading green, and a porch light glowing like a beacon. But the moment we stepped out of the car, the air felt different, cleaner, cooler, laced with pine and the faint trace of water somewhere nearby. After weeks of city dust, it was like stepping into another country, one built for breathing. Lena ran ahead, fumbling with the key, and when the door swung open, a warm hush greeted us. The interior smelled faintly of cedar and old books, as if every season had left something behind. Rugs sprawled across wooden floors, mismatched chairs surrounded a long table, and on the mantel, above a stone fireplace, sat a row of seashells, each one labeled with a year in faded ink. It felt less like a rental and more like someone's memory made solid. We scattered instantly, like children exploring new territory. Hannah discovered a board game missing half its pieces, and Max insisted they could improvise the rules. Lena's voice carried through the open door, sharp but playful. No one touches the wine until we actually eat something. Their sounds wrapped around me, blending with the chorus of crickets and the gentle lap of water against the shore. When I stepped back inside, the living room glowed with lamplight. We dropped our bags in corners, kicked off our shoes, and settled into the space as though we'd always belonged there. Someone lit a candle that smelled of vanilla, its flames softening the air. The windows reflected our movements like a silent second group of travelers, shadows gathered around warmth. It wasn't spectacular, not the kind of arrival you see in films with champagne corks and dramatic music. It was quieter, more humble. But as I curled into an armchair, blanket draped across my lap, I realized how rare that quietness was. To arrive somewhere not because it's impressive, but because it's enough. The weekend hadn't even begun, and already I could feel the city falling farther away. The kitchen turned into a small universe that night, glowing with heat and laughter, every corner alive with noise. Lena immediately assumed command, her hair tied in a messy knot as she clattered pans onto the counter with the confidence of a general leading an army. "I'm in charge," she declared, even though no one had contested the title. Max rolled his eyes, muttering something about sous chef rights, while Hannah grabbed the cutting board and announced she would contribute artistry, not chaos. I ended up with salad duty, the safe task, the one no one could mess up. Or maybe they gave it to me because I was already leaning lazily against the counter, sipping from my glass of wine, happy to watch them squabble. Still, I couldn't resist joining in. I tore lettuce with exaggerated seriousness, as though preparing the most important dish in history, making Hannah laugh so hard she nearly sliced a tomato unevenly, a crime she couldn't forgive herself for. The smells were intoxicating. Garlic hissed in olive oil, onions softened until sweet, herbs bruised under fingers released their perfume, bread warmed in the oven, the crust crackling faintly, promising comfort even before it reached our mouths. Steam clouded the windows, turning them into mirrors, reflecting our doubled images back at us. 4 shadows moving quickly, colliding, laughing, becoming something more than individuals. Chaos bloomed when Max, overconfident, decided to flip vegetables in the pan. He jerked his wrist with the flair of a chef on TV, but the contents went flying, half into the pan and half onto the stove. Lena screeched, Hannah yelped dramatically, and I nearly choked on my own laughter. "You're going to burn the house down," Lena cried, waving her wooden spoon like a sword. "At least we'll go out well-fed," Max retorted, smirking even as he scrambled to rescue what he could. Hannah, ever the peacemaker, slid another cutting board toward me. "Here, Selene. Better give you backup lettuce. We may not survive Max's culinary genius." I obeyed, tossing greens into the bowl, but my hands were trembling with laughter. And that was the magic of it. The way small disasters became jokes, how nothing really mattered beyond the noise and warmth we created. As the meal came together, the chaos softened into rhythm. Max discovered he had a hidden talent for stirring sauces if he wasn't allowed near the flame. Lena seasoned with the confidence of someone who had been cooking this dish all her life, even though she admitted under her breath that she was winging it. Hannah hummed some half-forgotten tune, chopping with graceful precision. I floated between them, setting the table, sneaking tastes when no one watched, adding too many olives to the salad, simply because I could. When we finally gathered around the long wooden table, it was as though we'd built more than dinner. The plates overflowed, pasta, roasted vegetables, bread still steaming as it tore apart in our hands. In the center, 2 candles flickered, their glow catching the glint of glasses we raised with exaggerated cheers. No one made a formal toast. Instead, we clinked with the reckless enthusiasm of people who knew the night didn't need speeches to be meaningful. Conversation tumbled over itself. Hannah admitted she once tried to bake a souffle and ended up with something closer to scrambled eggs. Lena told a story about sneaking into her cousin's wedding reception as a teenager just to eat cake, only to get caught with frosting smeared across her dress. Max bragged again about fixing the leak under his sink, turning it into such an epic saga that I nearly spit my wine from laughing. We ate too much, drank a little more than we'd planned, and when dessert arrived, a lopsided cake bought from a roadside stall on the way, we devoured it with such delight you'd think it had been crafted by a world-class baker. Powdered sugar dusted the table, someone smeared frosting on Hannah's cheek, and the room echoed with a sound I wanted to bottle. Laughter so deep it hurt, but in the best way. Later, with plates stacked precariously in the sink and crumbs swept aside, we lingered at the table, reluctant to let the moment end. The candles had burned low, dripping wax onto the wood, and their soft light painted us all in gold. I leaned back, full and drowsy, listening to my friends bicker about who would wash dishes, and thought, this is it. This is why I came. Not for adventure, not for escape, but for this. The unremarkable, irreplaceable joy of being together. When the last of the dishes were stacked haphazardly in the sink and the hum of the dishwasher replaced our laughter, none of us were ready to end the night. Someone, probably Lena, suggested we take the wine outside, and minutes later we were tumbling onto the porch, arms full of blankets, glasses, and a bag of marshmallows someone had found in the cupboard. The night was crisp in a way summer rarely is, cool enough to raise goosebumps on bare arms, but soft enough to feel like a caress. Above us, the sky was wide and endless, scattered with stars so sharp they looked close enough to pluck from the dark. City skies never show this many. Here, it was as if the universe had decided to reveal its whole face at once. I tilted my head back, dizzy with it. Max, ever the self-appointed survivalist, crouched beside a fire pit left by whoever owned the house. He struck match after match with a grim expression, each tiny flame dying before it caught. Hannah doubled over laughing, filming his efforts like some nature documentary. The noble man, in his habitat, failing spectacularly, she narrated between giggles. Max glared but kept going, muttering curses under his breath. It was Lena, of course, who finally knelt, flicked a lighter once, and coaxed the fire into life with the calm of someone who had always known how. Within minutes, flames leapt up, painting our faces in shifting shades of amber and gold. We gathered in a loose circle, each wrapped in a blanket, our legs stretched toward the heat. The marshmallows were skewered on sticks, roasted clumsily, some perfectly golden, others charred into crisp ashes we pretended to enjoy anyway. Wine passed from hand to hand, and the air smelled of smoke and sugar, laughter drifting into the trees. At first, the conversation was light. We argued about which pizza topping should be illegal, admitted embarrassing childhood crushes, tried to remember the lyrics to songs we hadn't sung in years. Hannah swore she still knew the choreography to a music video we loved as teenagers, and proved it by dancing clumsily on the grass until we begged her to stop. My stomach hurt from laughing, tears stinging my eyes, but eventually the laughter softened. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that asked for honesty. "I don't know what I'm doing with my life," Hannah said suddenly. She was staring into the fire, voice flat, almost casual, but the words landed heavy. The flames crackled, throwing shadows across her face, and none of us spoke right away. Then Lena leaned over, resting her head on Hannah's shoulder. "We none of us do," she whispered. "We just pretend better on some days." Her words settled into me like stones in water, because she was right. I had been pretending too. Pretending that I was fine, that I was busy in ways that mattered, that the loneliness I carried was just another phase. How many times had I wanted to say what Hannah had said, to confess that I didn't have a map, that sometimes I felt like I was running just to avoid standing still. The fire popped loudly, and Max, maybe sensing the heaviness, began telling a story about building tree houses as a boy, using crooked nails and planks stolen from his dad's shed. He described his engineering disasters with such exaggerated drama that we howled again, grateful for the release. But even as we laughed, Hannah's words lingered, weaving through the night air, twining with my own unspoken thoughts. I leaned back onto the grass, staring up at the sky. Stars spilled endlessly, scattered like silver dust. A shooting star tore across the horizon so quickly, I almost doubted I'd seen it. And I thought, maybe that's the point. Not everything has to last to matter. Some things exist only for a breath, but they change us anyway. I felt the weight of words pressing against my chest, words I had never spoken aloud. I opened my mouth, ready to let them out, to share the quiet ache I carried, about fear, about longing, about not knowing where I truly belonged. But the sound caught in my throat, swallowed by the crackle of the flames. Instead, I pulled the blanket tighter and let the silence speak for me.
The morning unfolded like a secret, slowly revealing itself. At first, there was only silence, the kind so deep you wonder if the world has forgotten to move. I lay cocooned in the soft weight of my blanket, eyes half closed, letting myself sink into the hush. The house creaked gently around me, wood expanding against the cool air, and outside I heard the faint rustle of branches shifting in the breeze. Somewhere far away, a bird announced the day with a long, clear note that lingered in the air like a ribbon. The scent of coffee reached me before anything else did. Strong, dark, familiar. It floated down the hallway, pulling me awake more tenderly than any alarm ever could. I finally sat up, hair a tangled halo around my shoulders, and padded barefoot into the kitchen. Lena was already there. She stood at the stove, hair tied in a messy braid, humming softly as she poured steaming liquid into 2 mugs. When she noticed me, she lifted one without ceremony. "Here, you look like you've been reborn, but not quite successfully." I chuckled, wrapping my hands around the mug, grateful for the warmth. The first sip was sharp, bitter, grounding. It slipped down my throat like an invocation, reminding me that mornings didn't always have to be battles. Sometimes they could be gentle beginnings. Outside the windows, the world was breathtaking. Dew clung thickly to the grass, sparkling in the early light as if someone had scattered diamonds carelessly overnight. Mist drifted above the lake, curling and dissolving in the sun's slow climb. The water itself looked painted, still, silver, reflecting the pale sky with a perfection so fragile it felt wrong to disturb it. Even the air carried a newness, filled with the smell of pine and damp soil, clean in a way the city never is. One by one, the others emerged from their rooms. Max came first, his hair sticking up at odd angles, muttering like a man betrayed by his alarm clock. He reached straight for the bread, tearing a chunk off before it was even toasted. Hannah followed, bundled in a blanket she refused to abandon, yawning like an actress playing exhaustion to perfection. She flopped into a chair, face buried in her mug, as if caffeine could resurrect her soul. The kitchen filled slowly, not with chaos like the night before, but with the easy rhythm of morning. The toaster clicked, releasing the scent of golden bread. Butter softened on a plate. Apples and pears were sliced into uneven chunks. No one rushed, no one demanded. We moved in a quiet choreography, brushing past each other, offering spoons, pouring coffee, exchanging sleepy smiles that said more than words. We carried everything out to the porch, balancing plates and mugs with clumsy care. The wooden boards creaked under our weight, but the air was so fresh it felt like stepping into another life. The sun had risen higher now, turning the mist into threads of gold that drifted and vanished above the lake. We pulled sweaters tighter around our shoulders, sat close, and let the morning settle over us like a blessing. For a while, no one spoke. We ate slowly, sipping coffee, eyes half closed, as though we were still dreaming. Hannah rested her head against my shoulder, mumbling about croissants, her words muffled by fatigue. Max chewed noisily, earning a glare from Lena that only made him grin wider. I held my mug in both hands, watching the sunlight ripple across the water, and felt something rare bloom in my chest. Peace. Not the dramatic kind, not the one earned after struggle, just simple, quiet peace. It struck me then how seldom I allowed myself this. I lived too often in noise, in the hum of deadlines, in the constant buzzing of my phone, in the worry that I wasn't keeping up with life the way others seemed to. But here,
On a wooden porch, with crumbs in my lap and laughter simmering softly around me, I realized how unnecessary all that noise was. Life didn't need to be chased. Sometimes it just needed to be noticed. I leaned into the moment, into the warmth of Hannah's blanket brushing against my arm, into the sharp sweetness of fruit on my tongue, into the way the lake mirrored the sky as if both had agreed to share one body. And I thought, this is happiness when it's not trying to impress anyone. This is what it looks like: quiet, simple, shared.
The day stretched ahead of us like a blank canvas, and for once, none of us felt the need to plan it. After breakfast, we wandered out, carrying towels and half-packed bags, shoes dangling from our hands. The sun had already climbed higher, warm but softened by the gentle breeze that rustled the trees. The air carried the scent of pine needles, damp earth, and something faintly sweet: wildflowers hidden in the grass. We followed a narrow path that wound its way down toward the lake. The trail was uneven, roots pushing through the dirt, patches of moss spreading like tiny green carpets. Hannah insisted on documenting every step with photos, crouching to capture mushrooms and wild berries, while Max teased her mercilessly. Lena walked ahead, humming some tune I didn't recognize, her braid bouncing against her back. I lingered in the middle, letting the sounds and smells settle into me, trying to memorize the sensation of simply being here. The lake was brighter in the daylight, a vast sheet of silver blue stretching toward the horizon. The water sparkled under the sun, each wave catching the light like a coin tossed from the sky. We didn't hesitate long. Within minutes, clothes were tossed aside, laughter echoing as feet slapped against the dock, and then splashes shattered the still surface. The water was colder than I expected, biting at my skin, but it woke me up in a way nothing else could. I gasped, then laughed, the sound bursting from my chest. Hannah shrieked behind me, splashing wildly, while Max swam forward with exaggerated strokes like a cartoon hero. Lena floated calmly on her back, eyes closed, face tilted toward the sun. We swam until our arms ached, until the water felt like part of us. At one point, I drifted away from the group, letting myself float on my back, staring at the sky. Clouds crawled lazily across the blue, and for a moment, I thought, this is what freedom tastes like. Not grand, not rare, just this. Water, air, laughter close enough to hear, but far enough to give me space. Later, we sprawled across the dock, towels wrapped around damp shoulders, skin warm from the sun. Someone pulled out a bag of cherries, and soon our fingers were stained crimson, pits scattered in the grass. Max tried skipping stones, his attempts failing spectacularly, each one sinking with a plunk that had us howling. Hannah recorded the whole thing, threatening to use it as blackmail forever. When hunger finally nudged us, we returned to the cabin for sandwiches. Nothing fancy, just bread, cheese, and tomatoes still smelling of earth. We ate them outside, perched on steps and grass, letting crumbs fall where they wanted. There was something so pure about it, as if the absence of polish made everything taste better. The afternoon drifted lazily after that. Some napped in hammocks we found strung between trees, others wandered off with books. But the silence we shared was never empty. It was filled with the hum of cicadas, the rustle of wind and leaves, the soft slap of waves against the dock. Even when we weren't speaking, I felt tethered to them, as though our quietness itself was a conversation. And I thought, happiness isn't always a spark. Sometimes it's a steady flame, one you barely notice until you realize it's been warming you all along.
The afternoon stretched out in a way that only summer afternoons can, long, golden, and unwilling to hurry. After swimming and a lazy lunch, we drifted into our own little pockets of peace, each of us claiming a corner of time. Hannah claimed the hammock between two tall pines, curling into it with a book that she barely opened before sleep tugged her under. Max lay sprawled on the grass with headphones on, mouthing the words to some song, his foot tapping in stubborn rhythm. Lena vanished inside, the clatter of cabinets giving her away, and returned a few minutes later with a bowl overflowing with apricots and plums. She held it high, like a trophy. "These taste like August itself," she announced, and she wasn't wrong. I took one of the plums and wandered down to the dock. The boards creaked softly beneath my feet, the sound swallowed by the hush of the lake. I sat with my legs dangling above the water and bit into the fruit. The skin split with a satisfying snap, juice immediately spilling down my wrist, sticky and sweet. I laughed softly to myself, licking it away, savoring the mix of tartness and sugar that felt impossibly perfect. I thought, this is what late summer tastes like: fleeting, decadent, impossible to capture once it's gone. The lake shimmered in the light, silver blue and endless. Dragonflies skimmed the surface in quick, precise darts, their wings catching the sun like shards of glass. Somewhere in the distance, a fish jumped, the splash small but sharp in the quiet. The air smelled of pine warmed by the sun, of fruit ripening too quickly in the bowl behind me, of damp wood under the dock. I let my head tip back and close my eyes, listening. The water lapped gently against the posts. Cicadas sang their endless song, and time itself seemed to sigh. Eventually, the others joined me again. We carried blankets and spread them under the trees where the grass was cool. Hannah found an old guitar inside the cabin, its wood scratched and its strings slightly out of tune. But when she strummed, it still sang. At first, she played clumsy chords, laughing at her mistakes, but then the sound grew steadier, familiar. She began to sing, her voice soft, carrying lyrics we only half remembered. Soon, Hannah hummed along sleepily, Max chimed in far too loudly, and I couldn't resist joining. Our voices weren't in harmony, not really, but there was a kind of beauty in the imperfection, and the way our sounds overlapped. Too loud here, too soft there, tangled like threads in a tapestry only we would ever see. The music rose into the trees, spilling into the sky, scattering into the fading afternoon. I thought, these are the songs no one records, but they're the ones that stay with you forever. When the guitar was set aside, we collapsed onto the blankets, staring at the branches above. Shadows flickered as the leaves swayed, patterns of light dancing across our skin. Hannah eventually stirred, her hair creased from the hammock, cheeks flushed pink. She reached for a plum, biting into it so carelessly that juice stained her chin. We laughed until she chased us with sticky fingers, threatening to wipe them on our shirts. Max pulled out a deck of cards from his backpack, proclaiming himself a master strategist, although within minutes he was losing spectacularly, inventing rules to cover his defeat. Hannah filmed his downfall, cackling, while Lena dealt the next round with the cold precision of someone who clearly had no mercy. I leaned back on my elbows, laughing until my stomach hurt, the kind of laughter that lives in your chest long after the sound fades. As the sun slid lower, the air shifted, the warmth softened, traded for a breeze that lifted strands of hair from my face. The scent of kine deepened, mingling with the sweetness of discarded fruit skins tossed into the grass. Somewhere a bird called out, low and insistent, as though reminding us the day was nearly done. Time didn't feel like it was rushing anymore. It felt stretched, languid, unhurried, as if the world had agreed to slow just long enough for us to notice. I lay back fully, the grass cool and prickling against my arms, and stared at the sky as it melted from blue into amber. My friends' voices drifted around me, laughter tangled with the lazy strum of the guitar, with the buzzing of insects and the lap of water against the shore. It was all so ordinary. And yet, in that ordinariness, I felt something extraordinary. The realization that happiness often hides here, in sticky fingers, in off-key songs, in the gentle weight of a day that asks nothing of you but to live it. And I thought, time doesn't truly slow down. We do. And maybe that's what makes these moments eternal.
By the time the second evening arrived, the cabin no longer felt borrowed. It was ours, in the way a space becomes yours when you've filled it with noise and crumbs and mismatched socks left on the floor. Shoes lay in careless heaps near the door, jackets draped over chairs, empty glasses forming small constellations on the counter. Even the air seemed changed, thicker with the smell of pine smoke from the afternoon fire, layered with the sweetness of fruit and the faint salt of sweat from the day. We didn't need to say it out loud, but the night wanted something different than the first. Less quiet, less confessional. This one called for chaos, for laughter that shook the walls. Max was the first to rise to the challenge. He unearthed the battered deck of cards from his backpack, holding it up like a magician about to reveal a miracle. "I finally learned the rules," he declared proudly, which of course made Hannah snort so hard she almost spilled her drink. The game started properly enough. We sat cross-legged on the rug, snacks piled in the middle like an altar. Chips, cookies, a bowl of cherries, bottles sweating with condensation. The first rounds were calm, tentative, but it didn't take long before accusations flew. Hannah shrieked that Max was hiding cards in his sleeve. Max countered that Lena had supernatural abilities, and I tried to mediate but ended up laughing too hard to form sentences. Soon the game devolved into nonsense. Rules abandoned, points invented, the winner decided by who could make the others collapse into laughter first. When the cards were finally scattered across the rug, forgotten under half-empty bowls, Lena cranked the music, the speakers buzzed with bass, the kind that rattled the windows and made us feel like the cabin itself was joining in. She grabbed my wrist and yanked me into the open space between couch and table. "Dance floor," she announced, twirling me before I could protest. Hannah leaped up next, already shouting lyrics to a song we hadn't heard since we were teenagers. Max, with zero coordination, attempted to spin her, nearly colliding with the lamp, which made us scream with laughter. The music carried us through memory after memory. Old hits we knew by heart, songs that dragged our voices hoarse, ridiculous dance moves that looked more like flailing than rhythm. The wooden floor thudded under our feet, glasses trembled on the shelves, and for an hour we became a storm contained inside four walls. At one point, the playlist stumbled onto a slower song. Without a word, our energy shifted. Movements softened, we swayed instead of leaping, laughed more quietly, the fire in our bodies cooling into warmth. I leaned against the back of the couch, chest heaving, hair plastered to my face with sweat. Across from me, Hannah's eyes were bright, Lena's cheeks flushed, Max's grin softer than usual. We didn't need words to know what we had built in that room. A memory stitched with noise, bound by nothing but joy. When the music finally wound down, we collapsed into a heap of blankets and pillows on the floor. My back pressed into the rug, Lena's arms slung across my stomach, Hannah curled with her head near my shoulder, Max sprawled at her feet, claiming he needed more space than the rest of us. We let the lamps bathe us in golden light. Let the silence hum between breaths. Let the moment stretch as far as it wanted to. I stared at the wooden beams above, tracing their dark lines with tired eyes, and thought about how strange it was. This weekend wasn't spectacular. We hadn't made life-changing decisions or revealed all our secrets. Nothing about these hours would make the front page of anyone's story. And yet, I knew this night would stay with me longer than most of the grand events I'd once thought mattered. I almost said it out loud, how much I needed this, how afraid I had been of losing myself to the routine of a life that asked for too much and gave back too little. The words pressed against my chest, aching to be spoken. But when I opened my mouth, nothing came. Instead, I just smiled, letting the weight of gratitude fill me quietly. Because sometimes the promises that matter most are the ones you never put into words. They live in laughter that won't fade,
in dances too clumsy to forget, in the hush of a room where everyone is exactly where they need to be. And I thought, this night won't change anything, and yet it changes everything.
Sunday morning didn't crash in loudly the way weekdays always seem to do. It slipped gently into the cabin, brushing over us with a pale light that found every corner. The half-empty glasses on the table, the playing cards scattered across the rug, the crumpled blankets that had become our beds. I woke slowly, my body sore from laughter and dancing, but it was a kind of ache that felt almost secret, proof that I had lived without holding back. The silence was strange at first. No music, no jokes, no chaos. Only the creak of the floorboards when I padded into the kitchen, the sigh of the kettle as it began to boil. Smoke from last night's fire lingered faintly in the air, mixing with the smell of wood and the first promise of coffee. I poured myself a mug, and for a moment I just stood there, watching the steam curl upward, listening to the house breathe around me. Soon the others began to stir. Hannah appeared first, cocooned in her blanket like a reluctant monarch, shuffling across the room with eyes barely open. "I need pancakes the size of my head," she muttered, collapsing dramatically into a chair. Max followed, groaning as though he had fought a battle in his sleep. "My body has betrayed me," he announced, earning a laugh from Lena, who appeared moments later, already composed, her braid neat, sleeves rolled up as she began slicing fruit with practiced ease. The kitchen slowly filled with movement. The hiss of butter on a pan, the rhythm of knives against wood, the clink of mugs on the table. We didn't speak much at first. Our words felt hushed, like even our voices respected the tenderness of the morning. But there was comfort in the quiet, in the way we passed plates to each other without asking, in the soft smiles that needed no explanation. Breakfast spilled onto the porch, where the air was cooler, edged with autumn's arrival. We wrapped ourselves in sweaters and carried plates of toast, bowls of fruit, mugs that steamed against the chill. The lake shimmered before us, the mist lifting slowly until the water glowed silver under the sun. Everything tasted better than it had any right to. The bread sweeter, the coffee richer, the apples crisper in a way that only September seems to allow. We lingered there for a long time, not rushing, just breathing. Hannah leaned her head against the railing, eyes half closed. Max flipped lazily through his phone, but never really read anything. Lena rested her chin on her hand, smiling softly as if she was memorizing the moment. And me, I simply sat, knees pulled close, watching the light ripple across the water, and felt the rarest kind of peace. Eventually, of course, the spell broke. Packing began slowly, each of us moving reluctantly. Blankets were folded, or in Max's case, stuffed carelessly into a bag. Clothes were zipped away, though none of us remembered whose sweater was whose anymore. Hannah ran around snapping Polaroids, the messy table, the crooked hammock, the dock glowing in sunlight. "Evidence," she said, "that we actually lived this." The photographs were terrible, crooked, overexposed, but they already felt priceless. I stole one last moment for myself. I carried an apple down to the dock, biting into it as I let my feet dangle above the water. The lake mirrored the sky perfectly, calm and endless, as if it wanted me to remember it exactly like this. The taste of the fruit was sharp and sweet. The sound of laughter drifted faintly from the porch, and I thought, this is why ordinary weekends matter, because they're never ordinary once they're lived. When the car was finally loaded and we pulled out of the driveway, I twisted in my seat to look back. The cabin grew smaller, swallowed by trees until it vanished completely. A pang caught in my chest. Not sadness exactly, but something close. And yet, as the road stretched ahead, what filled me was gratitude, deep and steady.
The drive back on Sunday carried a silence that felt nothing like the chaos of Friday night. Then, Our car had been alive with shouting voices, music loud enough to rattle the windows, snacks being passed around, and the kind of laughter that doesn't care who else is listening. Now, 2 days later, that energy had burned itself down into something softer. Not emptiness, but fullness. Like a fire that has gone from wild flames to steady embers. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, watching the landscape roll past in long, unhurried stretches. Fields glowed golden in the afternoon sun, dotted with hay bales stacked like lazy monuments. The sky hung wide and open, streaked with pale blue and faint hints of lavender where clouds brushed the horizon. I found myself tracing those clouds with my eyes, wishing I could slow them down, hold them in place just a little longer. Inside the car, my friends moved in their own small rhythms. Hannah had wrapped herself in her blanket again, curled against the door, her breathing soft and even in sleep. Max, for once, was quiet at the wheel, his hands loose on the steering wheel, gaze fixed but calm, as though the road itself had hushed him. Lena sat with her knees drawn up, flipping slowly through the Polaroids we'd taken. Every few moments, she laughed quietly, showing me one. Hannah with cherry juice on her chin. Max pretending to be a master card player while clearly losing. Me caught mid-dance with hair flying in every direction. None of them were good photos in the traditional sense, but every single one was perfect because they belonged to us. The car smelled faintly of coffee grounds and fruit skins, reminders of breakfasts and snacks we hadn't even finished before throwing everything into bags. The speaker played softly now, a gentle song with more melody than bass, the kind of music that fills silence without crowding it. When the chorus came, I felt my lips form the words, even though I didn't sing them aloud. No one did, but it didn't matter. The memory of our voices from 2 nights ago was still alive, humming underneath the quiet. I thought about how quickly the weekend had passed, how fleeting it all was. Just 2 days, 48 hours that hadn't changed the direction of our lives, hadn't solved our doubts or rewritten our futures. And yet, I knew they had changed something. Something subtle but essential. I felt lighter. The worries I had carried out of the city on Friday, the deadlines, the tiredness, the endless buzzing of my phone, felt smaller now. In their place, I carried something warmer. Laughter by the fire, mornings heavy with coffee and dew, afternoons slow enough to feel infinite. The skyline of the city eventually appeared in the distance, shimmering like glass against the lowering sun. Usually, the sight filled me with dread, the weight of routine, the noise, the demands waiting at my desk. But this time, my chest didn't tighten. I wasn't carrying the city back with me. I was carrying the weekend. I looked at my reflection in the window, my eyes tired but softer, my smile faint but real. And I thought, maybe happiness isn't always about the weekends that change everything. Maybe it's also about the ones that change nothing, except the way you remember them. Because nothing had shifted in my story, not in the grand, dramatic sense. On Monday, I would still answer emails, still cook the same dinners, still walk the same streets. But the memory of these 2 days, sticky fingers from plums, songs sung off-key, games played until we collapsed laughing, would glow inside me like a lantern. And sometimes, that's enough to light the way forward. As the car merged into the slow pull of traffic, I let my eyes close, the hum of the tires soothing me. I knew the city would swallow us again, but I also knew that something inside me had been strengthened, softened, renewed. And I promised myself quietly, without words, that I would remember joy doesn't only live in the extraordinary. It often hides in the weekends that seem ordinary, the ones that give us nothing to show but laughter, and yet leave us carrying everything
we truly need.